Welcome to the Protecting Your Nest podcast. Before we begin today's episode, I wanted to share some really good news. As a doctor who listens to podcasts via podcast apps like Spotify, Apple, and others, I've always hoped that one day I would be able to offer continuing medical education via that platform. Well, the good news is that this is now a reality. And moving forward with the support of QMed CME, some of my podcast episodes will help you earn continuing medical education in the form of CME, CE, and CEU. QMed CME is filling the knowledge gap in healthcare education through diversity, equity, and inclusion in medical education. So if you or someone you know is a clinician who is seeking an easy way to acquire educational credits virtually via podcasts, live conferences, journals, or enduring learning, etc., I would check out qmedcme.com, which I will also have, of course, in the show notes. There you will also find which one of my podcast episodes qualify for continuing medical education credit. Before beginning this activity, please be sure to review the faculty and commercial support disclosure statements, as well as the learning objective contained in the learner notification document. Now back to today's episode. As a conventionally trained doctor who will soon be completing his training in functional medicine, one of the things I've enjoyed the most is appreciating the impact my patients' life experiences has had on their current health status. In functional medicine, we use the functional medicine timeline, which is a way to honor our guests and our patients' story. I said guests, right? Patient story in a graphical representation that allows clinicians to identify factors that predispose, provoke, and contribute to pathological changes and dysfunctional processes in the patient's physiology. Once we hear their story and write it on the timeline, we are able to tell it back to them in a way that makes sense to them. This allows both the patient and clinician to unwind their complex collection of symptoms with the ultimate goal of restoring their health. Today, I want to have a conversation with a clinician whose life experiences have not only allowed her to find her path to healing, but whose life experiences has led her to making some significant changes in her priorities and how she will add to the world moving forward. Today's guest is Dr. Kamilah Williams. Dr. Milah, better known as Dr. Milah, is a double-boarded certified physician in family medicine and obesity medicine. After losing 30 pounds and maintaining it by focusing on healing from the inside out, she became passionate about holistic health. Dr. Milah is the creator and the host of the Single Well podcast, which is geared towards single moms and is meant to empower them in their own wellness journey. I met Dr. Milah, believe it or not, on Clubhouse, and I'm so thankful for that meeting. And believe it or not, it's just happy to see more people who think and see the world through the lens of metabolic health. So, Dr. Milah, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Protecting Your Nest podcast.
Yes, this is absolutely amazing. Thank you for having me on. I've watched you for a while and love your podcast and all your content. So I'm really, really happy to be here. So thank you again.
Well, welcome to my Protecting Your Nest family. I definitely was excited when I met you as well. And you won't believe this, just before our taping, I saw the trailer for the Black Panther, right? Wakanda Forever. So it's going to be difficult because our main superhero won't be in that movie. But I am so excited because it reminds me of you. Strong Black women were portrayed in this film. And I think the world needs to understand, which is why that movie is so important, that there are a lot of strong Black women in the world. And we need to make sure we see them through that lens. So I'm really very happy about that. So I'll definitely be, I don't even go to the movies a lot, but I always make sure to see the Black Panther, you know? Absolutely. So let's start our conversation. I noticed your name, right? And I hope I'm pronouncing it right. It's Dr. Milah, but it's Kamilah, right? Yep. So you decided to, use the abbreviated version. So when did people start referring you as Dr. Milah versus Kamilah?
It was within the last year. I haven't been asked that question. It's really interesting. Within the last year, I did that kind of to simplify. People have a hard time with my name. So sometimes I just try to simplify it to so something they can remember, something they can refer back to more easily. So that's why I did it initially. I think it also had to do with having somewhat of a personality separate from, Dr. Kamilah Williams, MD. And being able to kind of separate the fact that I am a physician, but that's not really the capacity I'm showing up in fully. Of course, we talk about things and I have expertise, but, so that was really it. And it was really for Clubhouse because I had met so
Mm-hmm.
many amazing people in Clubhouse and it was just something they could refer to. And now I'm known
Mm-hmm.
as that. And it's also a nickname that my friends use that I grew up with. So they don't say the doctor, of course, but a lot of my close friends call me Milah. So I just kind of stuck with it.
I love it. And it's just kind of cool to be comfortable, right?
Hmm.
Like I remember, and sometimes being a black female,
Hmm.
you want to get that respect, right? Well,
Hmm.
guess what? I think in my world, in my vision, I actually think the ultimate respect is when people are comfortable with you.
Hmm.
So um, so I literally have patients who, and again, some patients are like, I've been seeing them for years. They're older than me, and
Hmm.
they may say my first name sometimes, and I've never been offended by that because I think it's that rapport that I've built with them, and they feel
Hmm.
so comfortable. So I definitely have the understanding about the respect for names, and I know
Hmm.
it's doctor in front of your name, but I like the fact that you've taken it down a notch. Here trying to help people. We're not into titles.
Exactly. Yeah.
So let's make sure my audience gets to know you a little bit and talk about your story of healing and I kind of framed my intro with functional medicine timeline and how it's important to understand our journey, right? So you
Hmm.
had your own journey, and that's led to you being the person you are today. So let's talk a little bit about maybe some of the medical challenges you faced, what you did to overcome them, and just the journey that got you from where you were to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, as a physician, and I've thought about this a lot. People kind of assume we embrace health and wellness. So it's always been something in the back of my mind, like, well, as a doctor, of course, I'm all for health and wellness, but the definition of that changed for me when it started to affect me personally, which is a common story you'll hear of doctors that have made that shift. So for me, it was just really weight more so than anything else. I hated exercise before and as a resident, and I started doing it just because I thought I had to when I started to gain weight. So I had, as you're familiar with, we do a lot of running around and a lot of, kind of unhealthy behaviors in training. And so at the end of it, it caught up with me. I started to gain weight. I started to have some issues, but I was like, oh, I'll just go on this diet and do this kind of thing and keep the weight off. And so I did that for a long time, but over the years, it just kept going up. And I was like, what's going on? So it was more of a cosmetic thing. I was like, I need to get this weight off, but I want to do it more simply. And I want to do it in a way that I don't have to think about it all the time and carry around a book to know what to eat. And so I started to look into it. I tell the story often that we don't get any nutrition training. So it was like I had to find a way to learn it, but learn it quickly. And, I felt like maybe I missed that day or week of med school because all I remembered was berry, from my first year. So I was like, that's not really going to help me. So I actually bought the book Nutrition for Dummies. And I talk about that because it humanizes, us as physicians. People really think we already know all that stuff. And the book
Mhm.
still was like kind of too much. Like it wasn't practical. It was just a list of vitamins and what they did. And I
Mhm.
was like, okay, this is not helping. So something that I turned to early on was the Obesity Code by Dr. Jason Fung. I was
Mhm.
introduced to that by other doctors that said, oh my gosh, you have to read this book. It's going to be life changing for you. And it truly was. Just being able to see the practicality of it and the science of it at the same time really helped me. So by that point, I had prediabetes, I had prehypertension, I had hidradenitis, which is a skin condition that a lot of people have, especially Black women, where you have bumps on maybe on your thighs or in your anywhere your skin folds. So, or opposes, I should say. So like your underarms and places like that. So I had that issue. I had sinus problems, acid reflux, excuse me, plantar fasciitis, all kinds of back and joint issues. But, I was getting older and I was in my 30s and I'm like, it's just part of life. But I mean, I was literally hobbling out of bed every day. And at one point was like, I probably have something autoimmune going on. But I just kept pushing through, not thinking about it, still trying to eat a certain way, which was really a form of the standard American diet, and just not really seeing the connection. So eventually, when I did have formally developed prediabetes was after I had my son, and I was offered the diabetes prevention program. Did that, and it improved it a little bit, but it wasn't it wasn't life changing, I'll say, for me. And so that was, kind of an ordeal because I'm like, okay, I don't have a solid foundation. So fast forward to this time when I'm like, no, I need to figure this out. And I read the book. I started fasting first, which I know a lot of people don't do actually, but I started fasting first because it was easier for me. As a single mom, I was spending a lot of time buying junk food, for lack of a better term, in the morning to make sure I ate. I was like, I need to make sure I eat. So I was buying all kinds of stuff there, and it just kind of freed me from that. I was like, oh, now I don't have to rush to make sure I eat in the morning. And so I started doing that. It became relatively easily to me. And then I started thinking about being intentional about what I was actually eating during the times I was eating. So it's mentioned in the book a little bit, but Dr. Fung doesn't focus on low carb a lot. He does advocate for it some, but he doesn't talk about that specifically, or keto or any of that stuff. So it didn't jump out at me at that point. But then eventually I was like, I need to do something about quality. And when I did that, things really took off. At the same time, I was feeling better, but didn't realize it because I had gotten so used to having all those conditions that I just, was like, oh, it's just normal. And then I looked back and I'm like, wow, I feel so much better. I don't have all these pains and aches, and I'm able to hop out of bed and I have energy, and I'm not being what I call led around by life, where I had to constantly eat or constantly be taking ibuprofen or, doing all these things. And so, things really, really improved for me in that sense. Now, at the same time, I was also dealing with a lot of the other stuff, the other pillars, which you call your nest and rope. I had ended up getting separated and divorced after I had the baby, but separated while I was pregnant. I ended up during that time, right before, like after we got married, in the course of 5 years, I went from being, single, engaged, we got married, we bought a house, we moved into the house, we got separated, I moved out of the house, I'm pregnant. So then I'm going through that. My career was taking off because at that point it was right when you start to build your practice to the point where you don't have to constantly try to get patients to come in.
Right.
And so I'm really busy. And then I have a baby, and then I'm diagnosed with prediabetes, and I have that going on, and going through all that comes with divorce, having, kind of, struggling with my lifestyle, not knowing what to do. And so when my son was 3 was when I started to make these changes. But during the time when I was pregnant, I made a spiritual shift. I had already grown up in the church and had all of that going on. But for me, it started with a spiritual foundation. I changed how I connected with God. I changed how I connected with the church community. And that really helped me to make then this shift that I made a couple years later. So I jumped around a little bit, but essentially that was my path of healing, was finding my connection with God again, making sure that I was providing that foundation for my son was really where that came from. And then eventually realizing that I wanted better in other areas of my life, which led to me changing my health. And then, of course, as a physician, wanting to give that gift to other people.
Nice. Wow. I'm just happy that you were told to find this book. It's like it just kind of started things. And then, of course, your spiritual journey. And no, it's not okay to feel old when you're 30. No, it's not.
Exactly.
It's not normal. Anybody listening who thinks that's normal is not normal. And you don't have to live a life of chronic disease. And we do the diabetes prevention program at Advocate Aurora, a couple of sites in our hospitals, and they do well. I do tweak when I'm involved, and that's often. I tweaked it to be more of a low carb version, you're allowed to do a little tweaking because the recommendations are still fairly traditional in terms of diet. So I tweaked it. And I think that's probably why it wasn't life changing for you, because
I'm
they
glad to
still
hear that that's
recommend things.
changing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
That's
It wasn't
reassuring.
you. That's right. Another thing you mentioned that was pretty and powerful, which is why I call myself metabolic health doc. You said quality of the food. So, if you have a quality diet, rather it's low carb or low fat, you're probably going to be in pretty good shape. There's some things you have to nuances. If you're going through keto, you got to understand what keto flu and carb withdrawal is. If you're doing a low fat diet, you may want to be aware of B12 and zinc and things like that. And you have to maybe supplement. But at the end of the day, you can pull it off compared to grabbing something quick in the morning, like you suggested you had to do in the beginning. So I appreciate that. And what's really cool about your journey is that it's going to impact your child.
Mm-hmm.
That your child's going to learn how to eat better. One of the things that, as I suggested in the beginning, maybe some of these episodes will be continuing medical education. So we want to make sure that we speak to clinicians as well. We are just getting to the point where there's a comfort with low carb keto, and we're still not there with carnivore, right? There's a comfort, not even close, right? And thank God, there will be research led by people like, Sean Baker, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
Now, having said that, if you were to speak to a clinician and convince them that keto won't kill you, saturated fat does not cause heart disease, anything you would share with them to, make them feel more comfortable with the ideal of advising their patients or them personally taking the journey where they are doing carb restriction to improve their health.
Yeah, it's such a good question. It's something that's a little bit intimidating, honestly, in the beginning, because you have to learn about, like when I first started it, I was just doing it because I've heard it was good, and it made sense to me from the science that I read in the obesity code. But when I started to dig into it, I'm like, this could be the answer to all of these little ailments I've been seeing. It was like real science, real research that you're doing on your own. It's like, wow, like I've been noticing people have all of these little things that probably should react to this type of a shift, like you said, either any branching out from the standard American diet. So
Right.
with precautions, but it's a very common concern with clinicians. When I do talk to other doctors, the cool thing about talking to other doctors when you're a doctor is that they're inclined to not believe you're crazy. So they're, when you start saying this stuff, they kind of have to listen. They're like, okay, you don't seem like you're that crazy, so I'm going to listen a little bit, but they hear the word keto and they do get a little, you can see them kind of tense up. But I think that, one doctor said to me specifically, she was like, I think it's good if you're not eating just hot dogs and cheese. And I'm like, that's the problem. We think that it's just processed food that's keto. No, like it's supposed to be equality food and, clean eating and things like that. And I think that's where the intentionality has gotten lost when you talk about keto. There's a lot of, and that's what drew me to it, was that, wow, this is really something I have to think about, that I can't just look at a book and pick a food. I have to really know what I'm buying and what I'm eating when I go to a restaurant and things like that. So something that I often say, just very simply, to people or doctors that are thinking about it, I say, well, what do you think about like chicken and broccoli? Oh, well, that's a healthy meal, and like that's considered a ketogenic like a meal. If you ate that all the time, you would probably be in ketosis.
Right.
And they're like, oh, so I think there's that shift of thinking. I think there are some doctors that still believe ketosis is the same as ketoacidosis, which you hear a lot of us talk about. And that takes some teaching and training. But I think really, something that was very important for me was not just the practicality of it, but just telling people to listen to their patients. I don't think I got to mention this to you, but, I left traditional medicine last year because it became a very big moral problem for me. I couldn't shift where I was. I couldn't, make things happen like you've done so well in your position. And so I was like, this is not working for me. I know I have these answers and I'm not able to use them the way I want to. And so that led me to Clubhouse and being able to really just sit and listen, because I wasn't under a time constraint. And being able to just hear people's stories talking about the ketogenic lifestyle and things similar to it. That was amazing for me. And I encourage a lot of doctors to do that because we want to have an answer. We're so used to having an answer. We're always running a diagnosis in our heads. If we're interacting with a doctor, that's what we're doing. If we have that far off look, we're trying to think of those 5 things that this might be that you're telling us. But I encourage doctors, healthcare professionals to just listen and hear what they're telling you. So many people, and you can't fight those anecdotal, we try to discount anecdotal evidence, but just listening to hundreds, maybe even thousands of people over the course of 2021, just talk about all the improvements in their life, their lifestyle, things
Mm-hmm.
down to their relationships, their,
Mm.
the way that they interacted with their coworkers, like all of this stuff came out of them changing their lifestyle. And that for me was an even bigger turning point. Even though I knew it worked, when I heard that over and over and over again, it really changed things. So I encourage people to just, if you have a patient that says, hey, I'm doing keto, listen to them. Just hear what they're saying about it. Ask them what they're reading about, because a lot of the stuff they're looking at on it really is, helpful to us as well, because there's a lot of science behind it.
Yeah, I agree. I am lucky to be in a health system that doesn't necessarily endorse what I'm
Mm-hmm.
doing, but it allows me to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll take it even a step further. We have something called Advocate Aurora Enterprises, which focuses on the seniors, the new moms,
Mm-hmm.
and wellness in general.
That's cool.
And under that umbrella, there's things that we can do. Like they have Food Smart, which is an app that allows us to, have something in your hands where you have a nutrition professional who's also a coach. We
Mm-hmm.
also are working on a weight management program. But the point of it is, people on the weight management program team are also doctors who understand this. So when you're in a room and you have 10 people, or virtually nowadays,
Mm-hmm.
and we're talking about ways to improve health metabolically, when you bring up keto and low carb, you have at least a few people on the table who are like, oh yeah, I do it in my practice all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for any clinician listening to this, we do need a community. So, but you'll be surprised. I have a future guest who I'll probably ask to join the podcast, one of our urologists. He called me about a patient, and he said, yeah, I checked out a few of your podcasts. I've been doing keto for 10 years. I had no clue,
Wow.
right? I had no clue. So I think there are people, and sometimes doctors will do keto and not recommend it because of
Mm-hmm.
the repercussions. Like, well, I don't know if it's okay to recommend, but guess what, docs? It's okay because the American Heart Association,
Mm-hmm.
the American Diabetes Association, and the Society of Endocrinology, they're all endorsing, or at least saying it's one of the dietary patterns you can choose. So I think we have enough evidence, and it's okay. And I agree with you. It's not about eating hot dogs. Now, some people, Dr. Eric Westman said, if you got to eat a hot dog, or if you're a trucker and you got to eat a burger on your
Mm-hmm.
way and just do it bunless, you can still do that.
Mm-hmm.
But we want to eat real foods that are not processed. And if you have to eat that way periodically, even a vegan, it's okay to eat an Impossible Burger
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, but that shouldn't be your go-to.
Exactly.
See what I'm saying? It's still
Mm-hmm.
a processed food. So I
Mm-hmm.
totally agree. Um, and and so spreading this message is so important because it helps our patients and friends and family achieve metabolic health.
Mm-hmm.
I know you mentioned the obesity code, but any other resources that you've used that may be helpful to my listeners, even to a clinician, what other resources would you recommend that people go to learn some of these concepts?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, shameless plug. I often tell people about your podcast and your content because it's so simple and it's easy to understand, and people can get a lot from that. And it just shifts things. It's like, oh, okay, this doesn't
Yeah.
sound so, off the wall. But so I definitely, people that are listening, of course, are already listening. But going back and revisiting some of those. We talked about the book and Dr. Fung. He's a big resource for me. As far as fasting and just things in general involving metabolic health. Dietdoctor.com, I really use a lot for me and patients and things like that in the past when I was in traditional medicine. That was a resource I used a lot, because I felt like it gave them a simple way to eat where they didn't have to think about it a lot of times. That's something that comes up a lot with single moms, and for me is still an issue sometimes. It's just the convenience of finding something quick to make. As much as I love to cook, I don't always have time to do it, so that really helps. The Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners, which I know you're a part of as well, has a lot of really great information. Early on in my journey, I discovered the Nutrition Network and did some of the content there. So that's really good if you want to get into the science of it. It's really important to do that. But I really encourage, especially patients, people that, people with bodies to say,
Right.
we should learn about our bodies. Finding resources that tell you about how the human body works. And you can do it on a very basic level. You can get books that are made for kids. We say this about the Bible sometimes, to go get a kid's Bible and read it because it helps you to understand. Same thing with the body. You don't have to read the, pathophysiology textbook, but if you want to read that, it's very fascinating. I'm biased, but but you can find all this stuff online. I was talking to some students and residents recently and realizing how much more technology they have in the palm of their hand. Just really I shouldn't have been surprised, but hadn't thought about it. Where you can just look up, this particular part of the heart or what it means and what it does. And so I think that that's important for people to do, because I really believe in empowerment through education. Your doctor can tell you some things, but like we've been talking about, it's hit or miss. There's some doctors that know this lifestyle, know what to do. And there's doctors that just don't, that aren't focused on metabolic health, that we still think of metabolic syndrome as syndrome X. We don't know where it comes from. And so you have to have that knowledge yourself. It will give you a different position with your doctor as well. A doctor who's willing to listen will be happy that you know these things. A doctor that's not may not be so happy about it. So it may be a good turning point for you. But just understanding it will give you a really, really good frame of reference and empowerment over your own body and what happens to it.
Absolutely. Ditto to all those resources. And I'm not sure you're biased. I think you're just a nerd like me. Nerds
Very proud
like
of that.
science, right? So it is what it is. So,
Yes.
and I definitely, again, Diet Doctor is, I align with them and write articles for them because they are evidence-based. And for the clinicians, they have free CME. You can get a free course on how to do or understand a low carb diet. Is free, at least for that version. So I think that'll be cool. Nutrition Network, you have to pay for those, but I'm gonna tell you, they're worth it. And a lot of the training I've gotten beyond my obesity training, my nutrition and functional medicine was through Nutrition Network. We're evangelizing a little bit. So the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners are awesome. We think that they're important as well. So I do. And then, and one more thing about the Diet Doctor, they do have a way for clinicians to establish an account with them, which will then allow them to refer their patients to those resources, some free, some where they pay. But it just makes our life easier. We only have a little time in the office. And so if you're still in a traditional practice, you need to have a way to feed people information, recipes and things like that maybe you don't have time to do. Or maybe you're a nutrition professional. They're not metabolically educated, so they may not know how to do that as well. So I appreciate all of those resources. I think that's really important. And, let's be practical, since you used that term earlier. Somebody walks through your door, or you have a friend or family member, and they're like, okay, you sold me, Doc. I'm convinced this is a good thing to consider. Can you just give us just some practical dietary changes you would recommend that they start on?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the main ones that was really eye-opening for me personally was cutting out those in-between meals, and thinking of like we tend to sip on things, or we just have things sitting there. When we're anxious or we have a lot of work to do, we want something to munch on. We're just kind of constantly eating. And once I realized that was a big game changer for me. And it's something I still pay attention to now. When I start doing that, it usually means that something's off. I'm emotional about something, or I'm, trying to do too much work at once, not taking breaks. And so I usually tell people to just start cutting out those snacks, and if you feel like you don't snack, you probably do. You just don't think of it as a snack. So once they get that, they're like, oh, you're right. I'm like, collect your meals together. Eat. If you're gonna eat 3 meals a day, that's fine, but eat and then be done between. And then when you go back to it, eat and then be done, and make sure you're eating enough. Something else I tell people to look at is the actual quality of their drinks. So, you know, you probably were in the time frame when they were talking about pop, and like if you were going to do the artificial sweeteners, it was better to do the regular pop with sugar in it, which is when they started putting real sugar in it. And I did that for a while, and then I was like, not when I started doing this, I was like, that wasn't so great, but you know, what this lifestyle has taught me is the quality and thinking about what that sweetener does. So, of course, sugar is going to raise your insulin levels and cause problems and things like that. So, when you have that between meals, you're eating basically, and your body's, you know, your body thinks you're eating. So, you're kind of opposing yourself. So, if you have something like that, it's best to have it with a meal. But I recommend getting rid of those things, anything that can potentially spike insulin, anything that can give you cravings, because even though the artificial sweeteners don't increase your insulin per se, they do stimulate cravings in some people. And so that's a big thing that people do that they don't realize that they're doing, and that it's just a small shift. Sometimes not so small of a shift, but a small shift that they can do that's relatively easily. And then the only other thing I'd say is don't think about what you can't have. If you go in with that mindset, it'll be really hard, because it's like, then you're on a diet, and we're trying not to be on a diet. We're trying to get away from dieting. So, you know, just think about things that fit in that you love and focus on those, and keep it really simple in the beginning. And then over time, you can start to experiment a little and have fun with the Diet Doctor app and all that stuff. But yeah, those are the main things that I would say are easy to get you started that can take you a long way.
You may have to call or channel your parents, because I think you're my sister, because everything you just said, I'm like, wait a minute, is that me talking, or is this Dr. Milah talking? Oh my God, I'm sitting here like, oh my God, I feel like I'm listening to myself. So I love your responses because they make a lot of sense. And thankfully, when you eat the way we're describing and you get real nutrients in your body, you probably won't even be hungry for snacks. Some of it is what you see, so get it out of sight. Some of it is, so if I see peanuts on the counter, I'm going to want to eat them, right? So maybe they shouldn't be on the counter. And then the other part is that I don't feel hungry. So that's really important. I also like this idea of you're saying, well, you're going to get a little bit of a insulin spike if you snack, right? No matter what. So, and even if you don't get it from the artificial stuff, you may have that urge, or that, you know, it may trigger you. But I love that insulin spike, because what people need to understand is that too much insulin, if you're literally working your pancreas all day, eventually it's going to get tired, and years later you may have borderline diabetes or diabetes. But you become, you know, too much insulin, you become insulin resistant. And ultimately, that leads to metabolic disease. So, and metabolic disease is your blood pressure, your diabetes, your risk for cancer, your risk for dementia. So all of that makes sense. And I love your simplicity, because I found that in my practice, if it's not simple, if it's complicated, it overwhelms people. And even though I give them a handout that says, eat this, don't eat that, the goal is you decide what to eat. I don't tell you what to eat, even though we love Diet Doctor because they give you recipes, and some people need that. But a lot of patients just here's a list of eat this, not that. You decide what that's going to look like. And yes, as you suggested earlier, chicken and broccoli is not some crazy diet that we should be afraid of, right? Steak and asparagus, that's not going to kill you. So we have to really kind of help people understand what we're talking about here. And I guess the other thing I would say really quick is, you don't have to be in ketosis to do well. I mean, some people, they're like 300 or 400 carbs, and they're down to 100, and they're doing phenomenally well. So you don't have to be in this magical less than 20 carb place. Some people say less than 50. No, you just have to reduce your carbs compared to where you were. And we don't know what that number means for individual, but that's pretty much what you need to do. So let's not get crazy and obsess about, am I in ketosis?
Right.
Unless you're epileptic or something, that's not really the point. So thank you for that. You're kind of smart. I'm going to tell you why I say that. Not because of what you said so far, which was good, but because when I was in my residency, only the smart people were given the title of chief resident,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe you were the last person standing.
Right.
but it's a big responsibility, right?
Mm-hmm.
To lead other clinicians. You're literally a new doctor yourself. You're trying to find your grounding, and now they're saying, "Oh, by the way, I want you to lead your colleagues." That's crazy,
Mm-hmm.
and I wasn't prepared to do that when I was at that point. I really respect that you were. So go back in time a little bit, and as you think about your journey as a chief resident and a resident, any things that you would do differently now that you have this metabolic knowledge that you didn't have back then?
Absolutely. It was a great honor. Still love talking about that time. I loved my residency. I was in a residency that was in a community hospital that was pretty independent, where we basically ran the hospital. It sounds kind of like an ego thing, but no, it was kind of scary.
That was my training too. That's family practice. I
Yes.
mean, we just throw you in the hospital, you do everything.
Exactly. Exactly. Yep. Everything. So
Every
I
yes.
chose it because I was afraid of procedures. I still don't like procedures to this day, but I was trying to challenge myself, and I realized it was kind of a mission I was given. And I'm so glad I did. Never thought I would end up in that position. And I had some struggles, because now that I understand nutrition better, I understand that I need to really, truly understand something before I can apply it. It's my learning style. So, and I think it's true of most people, but I really didn't understand that. I always thought I could just learn something and just regurgitate the information, but I really had to apply it. So I did much better clinically than I did academically initially, because it was hard. Those random facts just didn't do much for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I say all of that to say that, when I went to residency, I was a little bit, intimidated by a lot of things, because I had struggled and I had some thoughts that I was like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to graduate, but I had that mom that was like, yeah, you're graduating. I don't care. So you can say all that, fine, get it out, but you're graduating. So, I was, when I got there, I was a little bit intimidated, a little bit like, I don't know, but my residency was really big on telling me that they wanted me there. And I was, I came from a school that they really, admired and thought trained their students really well. So it made me feel good, and it built my confidence. And so over time, as I went through, I just started to just dig in and start learning everything that I could. And I learned how to organize the information and learned how to, get the team together. And I really started to love teaching. And so over time, what ended up happening was, in our residency, you had to have the votes of your fellow residents, but you also had to have the faculty in line with being chief resident. So like you said, it wasn't one of those situations where, because I've heard of those, where
Right.
nobody wants it. So it was a really big honor to become chief resident, and it was it was heavy in a way, because I was a Black resident. It was a big deal,
Mm.
and so we had a residency of about 40 residents. So we had to do the schedules. We had to. So if anybody is watching that isn't familiar, like, what's a chief resident? You're basically kind of an administrator, before you graduate. So you're handling schedules, handling, resident issues, any kind of like leave times, people not showing up where they're supposed to, not performing like they're supposed to, all those kind of things. And I really, really loved it. And so I was like, I like meetings, and I like stuff other people hate,
Mm-hmm.
And so I think what I would do differently would be, now that I know what I know, is one, I would tell my residents to live their lives. I know that one's out of left field, but because I know so much about wellness now and metabolic health, it is so important to tell them to live their lives. I would probably, talk to them about not eating the ice cream and Mountain Dew that we all did in the middle of the night. And those kind of little things, but also getting involved in the policies of the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
We had that opportunity. We could sit in on meetings we were allowed to do, but it wasn't pushed. It wasn't like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
you should do this. And I wish I had done that more and gotten more into the administrative side, so that I could have more influence, or know how to have that influence when I graduated. So that's what I would do differently with that. But it really was an honor. It still is fun to tell people, because people are like, oh, you were chief resident. Wow. Doctors are pretty impressed by that, but
Yeah.
it was a fun time, and I really loved my residency too. So
Yeah. Well, we definitely are impressed. That's why I framed my, yeah. I've always respected some of the best doctors I've worked with in the past. They had been in those roles. And then a lot of them go on to be medical directors and
Mhm.
things like that. But it's a great way to learn how to be a leader. Ironically,
Mm-hmm.
when I pledged Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity in
Mm-hmm.
college at Xavier University, that's where I got my little nudge, because the dean of the college was an Alpha, the president of the
Mm-hmm.
college was an Alpha, the student government president was an Alpha. So, and then you're like hanging out with them, and
Mm-hmm.
then you're like, they're just like me, right? You
Exactly.
know, so it's not as intimidating,
Yeah.
and so that led to me becoming junior class president, blah, blah, blah. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that was the seed. But I think these are the moments that give you confidence to do the things that you do.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that you do that's not traditional is that you are a coach.
Mm-hmm.
And not for the baseball team, not for the WNBA, but you're actually a coach of wellness. And that is different. And so, talk a little bit about what led you to focus on coaching as you have tried to help patients heal.
I think, something that I have learned over the time I've been doing this is that I've always been a coach. As far as in my medical career, it's something that's hard to embrace because we think of, our job differently, what we do every day differently. But when I thought back on it, I was like, I've been coaching people for a long time. And, I found myself starting to lean into those like personal issues and things they had going on, instead of them saying like, oh, I had this breakup and this is what went on. And I'm like, oh, that's too bad. And then you move on. I started actually trying to give them advice limited, on a limited basis, or trying to, because I realized even before I made this shift, I realized how it impacted their health, because they'd come in and, oh, my blood pressure's been high, and, I'm not feeling good, and I have all these things going on. And it was starting to be obvious that, man, like there's all these little things, these little fires to put out, but there's this one thing that probably caused a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I realized that, I was like, man, this is something. So once I became, more focused on my own wellness and changing how I ate, doing all the lifestyle shifts, I started thinking about like, man, this is what a coach does. And so I started looking into it. So this was in 2017, when physicians just weren't coaches. So you look it up, you Google MD. I looked up on Google MD what um, what a physician coach would do, and there was no information on it, because it
Mm-hmm.
was like, oh, you hire a coach. If you're a doctor, you hire a coach and you do the doctoring. And I was like, but I'm more valuable this way. So eventually I like I said, I left traditional practice last year, and I really was like, this is what I need to be doing. But I have to figure out at that point, and then even now, I'm starting to figure out what I want that to look like. So I tried
Mm-hmm.
one-to-one coaching, and I do a pretty good job of it. I coach a lot of my, the people in my community, people around me, just kind of informally. But I think I want to reach larger audiences, which is why I'm
Mm-hmm.
kind of doubling down on my podcast, making more content, trying to reach the masses, which is what my marching orders were when I left. So I think that that's where it came from, was wanting the change that I saw for my patients, but knowing that me sitting there and writing prescriptions and doing those things, while important and still is important, was not going to get the change that I was seeing. It was, it was like you had to really start to think like, okay, people, where I started thinking about was people are coming back to me and they're not better. They're stable.
Mm-hmm.
They're thriving possibly, but they're not getting rid of this stuff. Like if anything, we're adding more of it. And I really had to think what would be most valuable. And then when people started realizing this about me, they started to seek me out. And I think I realized after a while that what they were seeking was the coaching aspect. They thought they
Right.
were seeking the medical, but they were really seeking the coaching part. So that's how I led up, how I got there.
Your life experience
Mm-hmm.
was something you were able to see. We have life experiences and we don't pause
Mm-hmm.
and reflect.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's, if you're a clinician listening to this, or a patient and that's trying to do better, we need to listen. And if you find that you're struggling and you're not happy with your path, listen and say, well, I have to at least do something different.
Mm-hmm.
And so your life experience, and a lot of the clinicians listening, they're not getting results. And you may be following dietary guidelines that suggest that you ask your patients to eat, 5 to 7 servings of fruit every day, right? And you're like, why are they not getting better? Now,
Mhm.
as a metabolic health doctor, it's obvious that, you know,
Mhm.
fruit is nature's candy.
Mhm.
That's why they're not getting better. Or you'll look at the old food pyramids and see all of these grains and cereal and rices and pasta as the foundation of your diet. And you're like, I'm giving my patients the recommended guidelines. And, but if they're not getting better, that's when you should be, well, maybe I need to question the recommendations that are being put in front of me. And I think that that's why we have to take our life experiences and we have to, change if we find the path we're on is not leading us to where we want to go.
Mhm.
And I think so. So some life experiences are struggles. They teach us lessons and we grow from them. Others are like, man, this is a better way to do things. Let's go in that direction, which is
Mhm.
kind of what you've done. So I really think that we have to pause, think about what we're doing, where we're trying to go and make things better. So, and when I think about you, and I think about your journey as a single mom, it's almost overwhelming, considering I do have a wife and I do have more support, uh, and so when I think about you, I think about the struggles and the journey that my mom had to take as a single mom, and I think about her level to, making sure my brother and I were all our needs were met.
Mhm.
So I think about all of that because it's such a common thing that we have moms out here doing their thing. So think about the struggles you've had as a single mom and what life experiences may have shaped you to become the parent you ultimately became.
Yeah, it's such a great question. I was thinking about that, and my mom was a teen mom. My mom was 18
Mm,
when I was born. So,
mm,
it was just really interesting because it was the one thing I was always told not to do was to become a single mom. And so it gets into your head. It's like, well, I can't be
mm-hmm.
a single mom. I can't be a single mom. I can't be a single mom. So here I am as a single mom.
Right, right.
And it was a rough journey because I had to grieve the loss of that marriage and that family that I wanted. It was really, really hard because it happened right at the time when I finally was able to get pregnant. I didn't get pregnant until I was 36. So
Mm,
actually it was 8 years ago this week that I had my son,
wow.
2 days after my birthday. So our both of our birthdays
Happy
are this
happy
week.
birthday to both of
Thank
you guys.
you. Thank you. So yeah, so it's fun to reflect at this time of year, especially because that shift was so crazy for me. But I remember that I had to give time for that grieving process of that change. So that was a big challenge of having that and being told so long not to have kids and be young, because then eventually she started asking me to have kids, but then not to be a single mom. And so
Mhm,
I had to reshape that, and some of the coaching aspect and shifting into helping single moms was that internal fight of, man, I really didn't want to be here, but I'm here. What does this mean? And then kept getting the prompt to like help other single moms, help other single moms. And so for me, it was learning to really step into the role as moms in general, because I have a lot of moms, a lot of married moms that tell me, I don't know why you
mhm.
always talk to single moms. I listen to your podcast too, because they have the same struggles depending
That's
on the
right.
nature of your relationship. We are, as moms, we just kind of take that nurturing role. We just take on all the stuff, anything going on with our child. It's like, I got to take care of that. I got to take care of that. I got to take care of that. And as a single mom, it's even more overwhelming. My son's father is very involved with him. He's a great dad. He does everything he can for him and he jumps in. If I ask him, my problem is the asking and
Mhm,
making sure I'm telling him what I need. The other side of it is, we support each other. And I found that, going through a divorce is very painful, but having to then turn and you go through this really trying situation with this person, you have shared your most valuable person together. You have to shift your focus to that person, to the child. And that's what
mhm,
we did. And so I found that I had to really learn how to support him and understand his schedule because he's in law enforcement. So the
mm.
pandemic was interesting to say the least. But, I had to learn to still support him in the way that I would as a wife, but looking for those his nest and rope, thinking about like, oh, he looks like he needs a break and he asked me to
Mm-hmm.
take him on his birthday so he can go out with his friends. Oh yeah, go ahead and do that, those kind of things. And he's done the same for me. If you have to go, we have to go away for our CME and stuff sometimes. And he tries to accommodate that. So I think that has been most important, is letting go of that grief and hurt that I had and channeling it into really making things better for my son. Because at the end of the day, he's the one who will suffer if we don't get it together. So that was
Wow.
hard. And then just, even though I'm a physician, there's this financial thing, kids are expensive. You have to pay for things and like get stuff. And even though a lot of people think that as a physician, first of all, they think we're all making $1 million a year. But second of all, they don't understand that there's still this scarcity mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also part of our culture as Black people. We just come with that a lot of times. And so I still struggle with that. And people, oh, really? I'm like, no, like you feel like you're always going to run out of resources and you have
Mm-hmm.
to really reshape that. And so I spend a lot of time worrying about those things and
Mm-hmm.
future and paying for this and doing that. And it's just different because even though I have a supportive co-parent, we have separate households that we have to run,
Mm-hmm.
and if I'm sick and I can't work, then my household is like, what's going to happen,
Mm-hmm.
So it's really, it's a really interesting challenge to go through. But what I'm grateful for is that I have been able to reshape it. I have been able to change how I view it. And it has given me time that I needed to focus on me. I think these last 7-8 years have really been that time for me to build up all of those wellness pillars we talk about and really work on myself, truly work on myself, and not just say, oh, I'm just going to move on and get in a relationship and do this and do that, but really like working on focusing on being a parent, focusing on what I wanted my career to look like. I mean, so
Mm-hmm.
much has changed for me being able to focus on me over these last several years that I'm truly grateful for the process at this point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I agree with you. When we talk about protecting our nest, if you just search that on the internet, you won't see necessarily me. You'll see financial stuff, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think it is clear parents focus on making sure their resources are there to feed and shelter your babies.
Mm-hmm.
We'll still call them babies. So
Yes.
totally. And I think my experience has been that women are even more focused on that than even the guys. Like
Mm-hmm.
you're really concerned about making sure your nest is secure and safe. So I totally get how that stressed you out. And I always encourage patients who are, when we're having conversations about finance, as quickly as you can get out of debt as possible.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you talk about something that'll reduce stress in your life. And I know that's hard for the single moms to even think about.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's just $50, whatever
Mm-hmm.
you can put to the side, whether it's a 401k or maybe towards that extra payment on your mortgage or the car, if you can get out of debt, that'll really reduce the stress. So I
Really
think that's
important.
something we all need to think about. And yes, even these doctors that you think are rich, there
Yes.
some of them, like the guy who did my LASIK surgery. I think he's probably doing pretty good
Mm-hmm.
because I
Yeah, he's
saw a
okay.
line of people.
He's
It's like a
okay.
line of people. It was like every 10 minutes. I'm like, wait a minute, I just spent thousands of dollars, and
Exactly.
it's like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So, so I think there are doctors who do well like
Yes.
that, but a lot of primary care doctors are, still out here trying to make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
So, totally understand all of that. And as a single mom, you probably are aware of the statistics, but in the African American community, it can be as much as 72% or
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
of the households, when they bring these beautiful bundles of joy in the world. A lot of times, for various reasons, they're single
Mm-hmm.
moms. And even our old president, Barack
Mm-hmm.
Obama, was born under those circumstances. And as you have suggested, there's a huge impact on you financially, emotionally, and I just think we need to at least pause for a second and say, is there something, any thoughts you have on how we can maybe improve the number of families that start off with two parents if possible? What I love
Mm-hmm.
about your story is that you have a partner who's there, he's
Mm-hmm.
present, he's doing his part, and we need more of that because we
Mm-hmm.
know all marriages won't last.
Mm-hmm.
But just from, if you had a young person in front of you who's just getting started, what would you say to her to make sure she reduced the chances that that would happen?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that sometimes it gets kind of mixed up into a lot of politics and different things that people
Mm-hmm.
focus on. But I think at the base of it is that we've lost sight of the family, the importance of the family unit, and what it entails. Because, like you mentioned, in your family, you have two sons and your wife, and there's a dynamic there that happens, and everybody is feeding into and off of each other in a certain way. And there are things that are missing when that's not there. And I think we'd be remiss to say, some people, oh, no, you don't need that. And it's like, well, you do. Like, I realize that my son needs his dad. And so I feel like I shouldn't step in the way of that. There's things he can teach him, especially as being in law enforcement and him being a Black boy, that I can't teach him.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think that we've stepped away from marriage. And I will admit, somebody's listening to this are probably like, well, did you always want to get married? I really did, until I got married. And then when I got divorced, I said I wasn't getting married again. But I came back around because I realized that even if I'm not married to his dad, that marriage and him seeing a healthy marriage is going to impact his future as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that
Mm-hmm.
my role is to make sure that my next marriage is healthy in certain ways, because there's things I didn't know and didn't understand when I got married the first time. I was seeing it as something of more of like a, not a fairy tale, but, we see marriage differently. And when you mention Barack Obama, I think that's something he did that was the most important thing, in my opinion, he did, was to show that you can have a healthy Black family. That's not perfect because,
Mm-hmm.
Michelle loves to talk about, the things that he does, which I think is hilarious, but some people find
Mm-hmm.
off-putting. But I mean, it helps you to see the realism in it, that, you see them and they look like, this knight in shining armor and this beautiful princess. But they're like, no, we have, day-to-day things, we have these things that we don't particularly like about each other, but there's all these things that we love about each other. And I think something that he did was that no matter how busy he was, no matter what was going on, he always showed that she was important to him. And I think
Mm-hmm.
we've lost that a little bit in our community, where it's like seen as weakness, a sign of weakness, to show that you love your wife or
Mm-hmm.
your husband, or that to even desire it sometimes is looked at like, oh, really, marriage is a construct, that kind of thing. So I think we have to get back to seeing the importance of the family. And if you're somebody that really doesn't believe in marriage, you can still have that without
Mm-hmm.
the marriage. It's just being intentional about it and saying, okay,
Mm-hmm.
this is what I want my family structure to look like, but be willing to wait for that to happen the right way. And I
Mm-hmm.
think for a young person who hasn't been married, hasn't had kids, I think that's what I would tell them is really think about how important family is. This is something I tell students and residents now, that, above all is your family. So when you're doing all your stuff, we're busy. We're so busy in residency and medical
Mm-hmm.
school. But I just tell them, I'm like, have kids, do the things. If you're getting married and it's the right time, do it. It'll
That's
work
right.
itself out, because you need that family unit for your life. And then this is for our next generation. So I really think the focus needs to be back on marriage and the family unit for us to step out of that, because we've gotten comfortable with demonizing that, I think,
Mm-hmm.
and it just needs to shift.
Well, I think one of the reasons why I was so excited about talking to you is because we have to look at the how people perceive us differently, and
Hmm.
it's a stereotype. People,
Hmm.
like you, kind of talked about your journey, and it sounds like, I remember when as soon as I was getting ready to graduate from college, my mom was like, "Where the baby's at?" I'm
Hmm.
like, I just graduated. Can I
Yeah.
finish with this part first? So, and then you broke the stereotype and
Hmm.
waited until you were older. But
Hmm.
people who meet you hear the single mom
Hmm.
title, they want to put you in this bubble. And the worst stereotype that we had was this welfare mom stereotype.
Hmm.
And so now, instead of focusing on let's support families and create an environment where they can thrive, and also understand the root cause of maybe why they started early with their kid, process. Let's focus on that instead of this stereotype
Hmm.
welfare moms. And
Hmm.
it's all done for the wrong reasons, many of which are political. And then if you go backwards a little bit, I think about how strong, like going back to the Black Panther,
Hmm.
and a movie that's going to highlight how strong this culture in Africa is, right? And if you think about that movie and you think about the what happened before we were brought here, those families back in Africa were very
Yeah.
strong, and the men were very involved. It was not just the men; it was the entire community. Everybody, and even today, I think in Africa, a lot of the families all have keys to their house, and they all raise the kids as a together. It's like
Mhm.
serious. So,
Mhm.
it was really slavery that broke up families,
Yes.
and it started this nonsense and made it more normal to not see Black families together. So, I think we have to a little bit understand our history, understand who's in front of us, and not stereotype people, which is
Mhm.
crazy. And speaking of stereotypes, my last podcast episode was a gentleman, Al Mahone, who I met at the barbershop. And again, I really wanted to bring him to the podcast because, with his White Sox hat on and his tattoo on his neck,
Mhm.
what stereotypes would come to mind with him. And then I shared during that episode that the top five or so words that were being used to describe a young Black male were dangerous, criminal, thug, aggressive, and of course angry, right? And although I didn't really look up a study for a Black woman for this episode, I couldn't find one. I did
Mhm.
look it up. The things that I've heard people say
Mhm.
about Black women are words like angry,
Mhm.
mad,
Mhm.
mean, loud, ghetto,
Mhm.
attitude, unprofessional, and stubborn, things
Mhm.
like that, right? So you're navigating in a world that is going to stereotype you. I'm looking at your hair, beautiful hair, right? But it's
Thank
more
you.
traditional, right?
Mhm.
It's not the straight hair.
Mhm.
And so you think about the world that may judge you when they see you. So what have you done to navigate in a world that may have opinions that are stereotypical,
Mhm.
and how have you been able to navigate in this world as a result of that?
Yeah, such a great question too. I mean, it's really there's layers to it with me being in the professional and the medical world as well. But just in general, I started to honor my authenticity. I have, I guess, always been a little bit of a quirky dresser, colorful dresser, because it's funny when you talk to people that knew you when you were younger, they're like, "Oh, yeah, you've always been like that." So I'm like, okay, but I love colors. I love, just kind of having, and I do it for me because when people mention it, it's
Hmm.
almost like I'm confused. Like, why are you talking to me about my whatever? Because I'm like, I don't do it, outwardly. I do it for my own personal, enjoyment. But I just show up that way. That's what I wanted to wear. That's what I wanted
Hmm.
to look like today. So I do that. And I really started to embrace it in my career. There was a lot of, traditional things about, because it's more based on the dominant culture and what they want us to do. And so there was this time where we couldn't wear, blue jeans in the office, and they had to, if we did, they had to look a certain way, or we, just little rules and things, or we had to, we didn't have to wear our white coats. I probably never wear a white coat, but those kind of things, like, where there's just certain standards and things in the office that we were supposed to do, and this was like 15 years ago. And I just always kind of did my own thing. And so eventually I just started, dressing the way I wanted to dress professionally, but colorfully, or wearing clothes that, you didn't have to wear the slacks and the shirt or whatever. And when I started doing that, I did think like, oh, people are probably going to look at me funny. And of course, I'm already a Black woman. Like, but I just learned to do that and I embraced it. And then eventually it spread to my hair. And really the hair thing started before my wellness transformation, but became a big part of it because it was like, I don't want to put all this stuff in my hair. I don't want to put all these
Hmm.
chemicals in my hair. And so it became something I was dedicated to. Like, okay, I'm going to stay natural and keep my natural hair, which is a whole journey in and of itself of not realizing the texture of my hair because we were covering it up for so long.
Hmm.
But yeah, like, I think that the authenticity thing was important. Something I've dealt with was, as a Black woman, really understanding the bias towards me, because I tend to not think about it that way, but then I had to I had to face it.
Hmm.
Being patient facing and having people have these automatic, kind of, preconceptions. It really came up when I was pregnant. I really thought a lot about, now I'm going to be a single mom and I'm pregnant, and people are going to have these thoughts about that. Even at my church or at different places in the community, people assume that, and not maliciously, but they just assume that my son doesn't have a dad. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, well, you probably, oh, must be really tough doing this alone. And I'm like, I'm not really doing it alone. But, all of those things come together. But especially when you talk about the idea of how I am as a person, my character, just by looking at my face. And something that's relatively painful for a lot of Black women is that, there's certain preconceptions about how we look and how we come off, and you have to be really gentle in certain
Mm-hmm.
spaces, and you have to code switch, and you have to be,
Mm-hmm.
turn down your music or whatever it is to seem less intimidating. And I think it's a shame that it hasn't changed a lot. But I have learned to just show up boldly, show up as close as possible to the true me, and just allow people to interact with me in a way that's more authentic. Because when I am not showing up in my authenticity, I really feel kind of pulled apart. I feel strange, and it's awkward, and you just
Mm-hmm.
you don't know who you are.
That's
And so
right.
you have to show up as yourself. And so as somebody who was always told, oh, you look like you're unhappy, because a lot of Black women deal with that. And I had some students talking about that just the other day, about what do I do with that? Because people think I'm mad because I'm not
Mm-hmm.
smiling. And it's
Mm-hmm.
something that's not expected of other women, of other races and ethnicities. And we just talked through it. And, someone was like, well, that's just not fair. And it's not. But I don't think you need to walk around smiling all the time. I think you need to find
Mm-mm.
the things that make you smile. And that's what I did. Once I changed and started doing the work that makes me smile, it's easier to smile. I'm not going to
Mm-hmm.
smile all the time, but it's easier to smile when I'm doing what I want to do, and I'm spending the time with my son that I want to spend, and, doing all of those kinds of things. So it's a really long answer, but yeah, it's really important to show up as you, and do the things that make you most comfortable. We always have I always want to say this too, we always have things to work on. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
people take it too far and say, well, I don't care, I'm just me, and that's it. We all have things to work on. But I think when it comes down to changing who you are based on someone else's perception, it's not fair, and we have to get past that. So the more of us that show up as ourselves, the better it'll be.
Yeah, you're funny when you said, I'm just me. Well, you can't just be you at my job. So it's
Exactly.
okay. There's levels to this, right?
Yes.
I can't go to the boardroom and just be the Tony that's at home at the
Exactly.
barbecue with my family. It's
Exactly.
a it's even the way I talk to people, it changes. That's
Mm-hmm.
why this is very nuanced, because if I'm dealing with some relatives in Mississippi,
Mm-hmm.
I get a little southern.
Mm-hmm.
I started talking a little Southern.
Yeah.
When I'm in a boardroom, I'm more thoughtful about
Mm-hmm.
how I'm expressing myself. It's not that I'm not being authentically myself. I just
Mm-hmm.
need to be in a professional mindset. It's nothing. It's never. And the funny thing about, you said, um, you don't think about bias much. I'm actually just like you. Like, I think when I first started going to the boardrooms, I realized I was like maybe I was the only Black person in the
Mm-hmm.
room at the table. I don't think about it much at all anymore. And I do live in my authenticity. But I do think people may think here in this conversation is that we think about these Black issues all the time. We really don't.
No.
And the parts that are more natural, like how I deal with a police officer, those things are
Mm-hmm.
just innately in us. I don't think about this stuff. I just I'm living my life just like everybody else. It's just that there's an awareness that things may be a little different, and
Mm-hmm.
we have to navigate differently. But I'm sure when Michelle Obama entered the White House, she kind of knew
Mm-hmm.
that she had to handle herself differently, and that
Mm-hmm.
she's going to be treated differently, just like you've suggested. That it is what it is, but I do want to live in a world where that's less of a necessity.
Mm-hmm.
And but Michelle has to be the first lady. She has to
Mm-hmm.
carry herself like the first lady,
Mm-hmm.
and that has nothing to do with color. That's just common sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's like,
Yes.
just do that. Right. Right. We
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't want her doing things that did make sense for a first lady. So another thing that I want to touch on real quick is, you know, um, this bias in healthcare, that's still present.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, people don't always get what they need out of their interaction with healthcare. So I'm sure you've experienced that, seen that. anything that you would say would be helpful
Mhm.
to improve or to reduce the bias in healthcare?
Yeah, a lot of people kind of don't deal with it because it's such a big problem and they just don't want to, it's uncomfortable and nobody wants to talk about it, but we need to talk about it. That's probably the first step, is talking about it. And it's not in the way people think. I think when people think about bias, they think it's going to be blatant, like, I don't want a Black doctor. Like, that
Hmm.
happens, but it's usually not that blatant. It's the way we're perceived. It's people making comments on my hair that sound kind of, interesting. But also when you're talking with a patient, their experiences and not taking heed to that, thinking about things on a deeper level than what they're presenting with. So, for example, if they don't want to take a certain medication, it could be that they're really fearful due to some of the historical things that have happened
Hmm.
when either in history in general, or they've had a family member that took something and they didn't understand that it was more complex, but they're like, nope, when they took that medicine, then everything went downhill.
Hmm.
And so you have to really know what's behind what they're saying. And it's hard to do that in a 15-minute visit. I totally agree. But understanding that. And then also, identifying your biases. And of course I can't remember the name of the website, but there's a website where you can identify your
Hmm.
biases. And we all have them. So it's not a thing that's just with, white
Hmm.
physicians, or, it's everybody. We all have them. We all tend to prefer people that look like us. It's just something that's innate.
Hmm.
So that's not a problem. That's not necessarily wrong. It's just, how do you deal with it, and what are you doing? How's it affecting your behavior? How's it affecting your medical decisions? How's it affecting things that you do in your line of work? And you have to be really mindful of that, because sometimes we do. You're just your brain always wants to make a straight connection. So it's
Hmm.
kind of like our sugar cravings. Like, your body knows that you feel better when you eat that sugary thing. So instead of going through the whole process, it says, "Oh, I feel sad. I want this food." So it's the
Right.
same thing with bias. You see someone in front of you, you just automatically make assumptions to make a decision and categorize it and move on. And for me, identifying those biases was really helpful, because especially as black people, black physicians, we are inclined to think we don't have them, or if we have them, that they're justified. And it just depends on what it is. And so I think that that's where it starts, is having the conversation and really identifying the biases that we have, and then providing support on a systemic level. Because I think a systematic level, because I think we, well, really systemic. I think we have all these DEI initiatives and all these things to kind of
Hmm.
include people, but it's more for optics sometimes. And I
Right.
think we really have to do the work. We have to really get down and do the work of being more inclusive in a really genuine way.
Yeah, and you have to be comfortable
Mhm,
in that. I co-chaired the Diversity and Inclusion Committee for Advocate
mhm,
before we merged to Advocate Aurora. And you have to, if you're at that table and you're just trying to conform to the thinking at the table, and you're one of the people who, in theory, has a perspective that's different because you're a person of color, then shame on you. I
mhm,
mean, why be at the table, right? So I think the first part is to get comfortable being
mhm,
authentic, as we talked about earlier. And then the second part is, once you're comfortable being authentic, you need to bring up issues that you feel would add value, or perspectives that would add value. So I think that's really important. And I had to learn to do that myself. So kudos for you for doing that. I'm also a person who believes in, um, self care.
mhm.
Self care is not selfish, is what I tell
Yes.
my patients. So, what's your thoughts on that as we're kind of wrapping up this discussion?
Mhm,
It seems that you understand that because you've made
mhm.
some pivot changes, right?
Yes.
So,
Yes.
talk a little bit about that. I think our audience would benefit from that.
Yes, absolutely. This was a concept I also had to learn, because I think for with self care, and especially for women, the first thing that comes to mind is something frivolous or, superficial. So, like, getting their nails done, getting a
Hmm.
massage, going to some retreat or whatever that looks like. And those are important things. Those are things that we should do. We should, enjoy the fruits of our labor. We're all working and doing all these things. We should enjoy that. But when I started to think about self care as self preservation, it changed my mindset surrounding it. I started to think about how Burnout is a huge problem in medicine. I mean, there's no way to even state that as big as it is. It's just people don't realize how big of a problem it is. More than half of physicians are on some
Mm-hmm.
spectrum of burnout. And so realizing that the career, the things I was taught, while I'm so grateful and I love being a physician, there was a lot of behaviors I was taught that weren't healthy. Being available all the time, not having boundaries, being everything has to be perfect. All of these things taught me behaviors that weren't good for me. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, you kind of have to be a perfectionist nerd to be a doctor. So it
Pretty
doesn't,
much.
you're already like that. And then it adds to it. So I realized that all of those things had added up to affect my health. And by the time that I decided to walk away from what we call traditional family medicine, I was having health issues directly related to that, having, heart palpitations and severe anxiety and, just all of the stuff. And I was like, this is not like, I'm going to get sick. This was something I kept telling my mom when I started to, things were getting worse and worse. I was like, I'm going to get sick. There's gonna be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna get sick, and I'm gonna need this disability insurance that I have that I'm clinging so onto so much because that's a
That's
big
right.
thing. It's the benefits and all of that. But I say all of that to say that once I realized that this was something that I had to do, it was a necessity, then it is not selfish. It was something that I had to teach people. Like I told you, I have people come in and they're talking about some personal thing, but they're also having all these health issues. And I would just sit there, especially once I started learning about this and say, you're focusing on everyone else. You've told me about everybody else, but not you. And they're like, oh, I don't have time to take care of me. And I'm like, but you have to, because if you don't take
Mm-hmm.
care of you, then who's going to be there for them? You're very worried, necessarily so about your kids and your spouse and whoever else, but who's going to take care of them if you're gone? If you're not taking care of you, you have to start with you. And oddly enough, somebody I learned that from was Michelle Obama. In the
Oh,
midst
wow.
of starting all of the stuff with being having a husband who's president, I mean, imagine that, like trying to
Mm-mm.
navigate that. She was like, no, I come first. I take care of myself first. And people saw that as selfish and really kind of demonized her for that a bit. But when I heard that, I was like, you know what? She's right.
Mm-hmm.
Because how is she going to be all these things, show up as the poised first lady if she can't take care of herself? So she takes time and does stuff for her, and she always has. And I think that was a big lesson for me because she's a boss in her own right. She has her own, degrees, and she's an attorney and she's got all that stuff going on, but she's, trying to make sure that she's available in the best way she can be. And I tell my patients, I tell myself, I tell anybody that I coach the same thing: take care of you. It is not selfish. You deserve to be cared for as well. So yeah, very important.
Yeah, very, very true. And I really, I think about a previous guest, podcast episode 25, and Dr. Paul Deschamps,
Hmm.
and he talked about his whole episode was about physician burnout, and he wrote a book, Preventing Physician Burnout. So it's easy to find, and hopefully maybe we can have that in the show notes. But I'm gonna tell you, we have to take care of the people who are providing the care, and I'm just happy that you've understood that. We're all kind of constantly working on that because we're
Hmm.
doing a lot of stuff,
Hmm.
but I'm just happy that you valued that and you're making that a priority in your life. And speaking of priorities, we want to make sure you're here many years to come to help spread this healing message. So when
Hmm.
you think about my nest and rope, you know, which aspect of it are you going to give the most attention, maybe one or two over the next 12 months? Where do you plan to focus so you can achieve your ideal health?
Yeah, for me, it really goes back to the basics. It's oddly enough diet and exercise. I've worked on
Yeah.
stress and sleep. I've settled into a career that I love and that I don't feel stressed about all the time. I've worked on all of my emotional things. Still, making sure I'm tapping into that. You know, just being mindful of all the other things. And so for me, it comes back to maintenance and like thinking about what that looks like, because where I've struggled is, you know, always being on the weight loss train, right? Always thinking about like, I need to lose weight. I need to lose weight. I need to lose weight, because that's where I started from. And it was my son, of all people, who brought it to my attention. I've always used the scale for me as feedback. I always tell people feedback, not failure. So it's like a number, it just tells me where I am. It's not a judgment of character. But when I start to see a shift, and it's subtle, when I start to see it move, the needle move a little bit, and I'm like starting to change what I'm doing based on that number, I know I need to take a break from it. So I took a break from it this year and kind of did what we call reverse dieting, and just, you know, kind of ate more freely. Not that I'm usually restricting, but ate more freely than I normally do, just to give myself that break. And like in that process, I thought about, I need to learn how to maintain my lifestyle and make this a true lifestyle. Even though it felt like a lifestyle and it didn't feel restricted, you get to a point where there are certain mindsets that change about certain foods and things that, you know, where it's like, oh, I shouldn't have that. You know, it's just in your head. And so I had to really think about that. And then also, being someone who works virtually, I sit a lot. And so I've gotten accustomed to sitting a lot. And I was like, you know, even though I know exercise is not a weight loss tool, I know the amazing benefits to moving. And I've always been someone who's been not always, I hated exercise at first, but someone who eventually developed a love for exercise enough to do like, you know, organized bike rides and, you know, spinning. And, you know, I did a half marathon and all this stuff. I need to get back to that. It's part of my self-care, because it really helps me emotionally and mentally as well. So those are the things I'm working over the next 12 months of developing a pattern for myself based on all that I've learned that I can just sustain over a long period of time.
Excellent. And definitely, I've only been consistent with exercise for about 3.5 years now.
Okay.
You feel completely differently. And the irony is that I exercise maybe a couple of times a week. I just do it
You
intensely.
don't need a
And
lot.
that's been, you do
Yeah.
not need a lot. And that's a great message to share. So I know you're going to be podcasting and coaching. So share with my audience how they can find you and what to expect moving forward.
Yeah. So what I'm really doing is pouring myself into getting the message out about just metabolic health. Because even though I started with fasting and keto personally, I realized quickly that the true goal is that metabolic health, but also the other things, the nest and the rope, all the other wellness pillars that we have to do, which are even more important. So for me, that's something I want to focus on, but on a larger scale, and really get into going on podcasts like yours, and also recording my podcast more consistently coming up. I did record, it was really interesting. I did my podcast for 2 years, pretty much straight through. I shifted it over to the single well and then continued. And I just took a break this year just to kind of see where I wanted to take it. And I really want to tap into that more. So I am on Instagram at the single well. That's a good place to reach out or message or things like that. That's where I'm probably most active when I'm active on social media. And then I also have an email for the podcast, thesinglewell@gmail.com, which is a good place to reach me as well. But there'll be a lot of stuff coming up, a lot of great things coming down the line to that end. So I'm excited to be creating more content for more people to consume. And yes, men and married women are welcome to listen to my podcast. I hear that all the time.
That is funny. Thank you for throwing that in, because that is absolutely, it reminds me of a previous guest whose book is called Dirty Girl, but in dirty in terms of toxins. So she talked about detoxifying. But it's not just for girls. It's not just for women. It's for everybody.
Everyone.
So, and I have that book on my shelf. So thank you so much.
Absolutely.
You may not know this, but I've already contacted the Black Panther producers, and I'm going to put your name out as a future person to feature in the movie. So if you get a call, you'll know what happened, because you're the epitome of a strong Black woman.
Thank you.
And I really appreciate you for being with me today and just getting to know you. That's one thing cool about podcasts. If you don't know somebody, you will know them after you have a podcast with them.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate you. And thank you so much for being with me today. Okay. Being
Absolutely.
here.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So, guys, during this episode, we learned some of the life experiences that Dr. Milah had that helped her become the woman she is today. And unlike the stereotypes we mentioned that some used to describe Black women, Dr. Milah is the example of what I've seen in my life. And she's really a true reflection of what many Black women are like. And I will say she's independent, strong, hardworking, smart. She's a fighter. She's determined, resilient. Of course, she's nurturing to her beautiful son, and she's just willing to do whatever is necessary to help her achieve her goals and to protect her family. So she reminds me of my mom because she was willing her entire life to sacrifice each and every day. She worked at a factory job, Nestle's, where they make Baby Ruths, Butterfingers, and things like that. And she worked there for years, literally her entire life, to support me and my brother. So we would have food, shelter, and of course, all of our basic needs. So in some ways, I dedicate this episode to my mom and all the other moms out there who are doing this sacrifice thing every single day. So let's not reduce them to these stereotypes, these labels. They are unique, diverse, and beautifully created. And if you're a Black woman checking out this episode, you are beautiful. Your skin is beautiful. Your hair, like Dr. Milah's hair, is beautiful. And you're just beautiful on the inside and out. And I'll take it even further. If you're not an African American female, but you're a woman, your skin is beautiful, your hair is beautiful, and you were beautifully created inside and out. So I really thank everybody for, checking out this episode. I really felt it enriched me as a human being, and I hope it enriched you. And we're going to continue learning and growing. And I definitely want you to check out Dr. Milah's podcast. I think she's doing a great job, or use her as your coach. So with that, guys, I ask that as we wrap up, that you continue to be safe, be well, and continue to protect your nest.